Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this Thursday morning webinar series. I am Chloe Tetro. I'm the health coach here with ReadyCare, and for this morning webinar series, I am Chloe Tetro. I'm the health coach here with ReadyCare. We are going to be looking at, I just realized I had myself open on the YouTube tab. I was thinking, where is that echo coming from? We're going to be looking at reversing type 2 diabetes and pre-diabetes through a dietary approach. Now, of course, we're going to be looking at a low carbohydrate approach throughout this short webinar, discussing some of the ways that food and insulin resistance will be linked to pre-diabetes and diabetes, and seeing some of the evidence that is in there with regards how a low carbohydrate diet can help in reversing insulin resistance. Look at what exactly is the condition itself. So, condition where the body pancreas failed to produce enough insulin. Insulin is crucial because it helps to regulate blood sugar levels. So as the body becomes more resistant to insulin and the blood sugars rise, it will produce more and more and more insulin. The body then becomes resistant to it. So that's where we're getting the words resistance, insulin resistance. And in the pre-diabetes case, that'll refer to a state where blood sugar levels are higher than normal, but aren't yet high enough to be diagnosed as diabetes. However, something to note and to keep in mind is that pre-diabetes is essentially diabetes happening. They're not two separate conditions. They're in fact one condition, which is insulin resistance happening. 422 million people globally are living with diabetes, according to the World Health Organization. So you're looking at about 34.5% of adults having pre-diabetes, and approximately 90% of those being unaware of their condition, with 70% of those then going on to go from pre-diabetes to actual full-blown diabetes. So insulin resistance is basically when the hallmark of type 2 diabetes would be insulin resistance, and it occurs when cells in the body no longer respond to insulin as effectively as they should. So as a result, the pancreas produces more insulin to compensate, as we've said, but basically it can't keep up after a while, which leads to those elevated blood sugar levels. So the diet component part of things is one of, and I would say the most crucial role when you're looking at type 2 pre-diabetes and any of the conditions associated with insulin resistance. Things like non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, high blood pressure, cholesterol would all be implicated with insulin resistance, as well as difficulty losing weight. So the diet's role is a huge part, the most important part in reversing that insulin resistance. When you're looking at high carbohydrate diet, especially those rich in refined sugars and starches, these will contribute to spikes in your blood glucose. And frequent spikes then will cause the pancreas to release larger and larger amounts of insulin. Over time, of course, this constant demand on the pancreas will lead to the insulin resistance aspect of things, and the kind of breakdown that happens in the body that leads to an awful lot of these different conditions that may seem like they're unrelated, but terribly related to each other. So here, this is really a root cause approach to the difficulty. We're looking at what is the underlying mechanism that is causing the type 2, that is causing the pre-diabetes. And instead of looking at it symptomatically, really getting to the root cause of it. So you look at the kind of medical overview, the kind of bird's eye zooming out of the interlink. To put it very simply, insulin resistance occurs at the level of muscle and fat cells. So when you look at a typical metabolic state, insulin helps glucose enter cells where it can be used for energy. Now, when there's resistance, glucose builds up in the bloodstream and the cells become less and less responsive to insulin. So when you reduce your carbohydrate intake, now remember, all carbohydrates will be broken down into glucose, and this is something that we touch on quite often in these webinars, but all carbs will turn to sugar, and that leads to a massive strain on the pancreas. So the reverse engineering aspect of that is basically to take the carbohydrates that are leading to this huge spike in blood sugars, which is getting the body to produce more insulin, and instead looking at the carbohydrates. So how a low carb diet works in reversing insulin resistance is basically it's designed to minimize the intake of carbohydrates, which are then broken down into glucose and sugar in the body. By limiting the carbohydrate intake, those blood glucose levels remain more stable, and the pancreas is not forced to produce excessive insulin, which is causing a host of difficulties all across the body. So the research shows that reducing carb intake helps to improve insulin sensitivity, of course, and can lead to a reduction in blood glucose levels, which eliminates the need for medication in some cases. And definitely in a lot of the cases that I would come across in my work with hundreds of patients across the last few years, the necessity for medication just really comes down. In fact, we're in and around a 49% reversal of type 2 diabetes, which is absolutely phenomenal. Like if any pharmacological intervention could do that, we'd be doing absolutely brilliantly. So key mechanisms that you're looking at here is reduction in blood sugar spikes. As they remain more stable throughout the day, the stability allows for a less frequent need of insulin release, which allows the body then to repair insulin sensitivity. Increased fat burning, which is an aspect that a lot of people will be seeking as well when they sign up to the program. They'll say, yes, I'd like to get my HbA1c and my metrics into a shape that I'm happy with. And at the same time, if there was an increase in weight loss, I'd be super happy, because anywhere that you have insulin resistance through any of its associated conditions, insulin is basically a fat storage hormone. So a surplus of insulin that we see in prediabetes and diabetes basically brings up the body's storage of fats. So increased fat burning. When carbohydrates are reduced, the body enters a state that's called ketosis, where it starts burning fat for fuel instead of glucose. The process has been shown to help to increase weight loss, and which really helps towards the metabolic health of the individual. The weight loss is a major benefit overall with low carb diets. So even modest weight loss of 5 to 10% will really help with the improvement of insulin sensitivity and reduce blood sugar levels. And there's this kind of thought process out there that it is weight that actually, so increased weight leads to type 2 diabetes. And I'd put the invitation out there to actually start to think of it the other way around, that weight is likely going up because the levels of insulin in the body are going up, and insulin, being a fat storage hormone, will basically lead the body to retain a lot more weight. So if you're seeing an increase in difficulty losing weight, it can sometimes be a hallmark of insulin resistance. So evidence of statistics, there's an awful lot out there with regards studies on low carbohydrate diets for type 2. Most studies will show a significant reduction. So you're looking at a 3-week participation like we have in ReadyCare, and a massive percentage reduction in HbA1c. You have a look at the Annals of Internal Medicine in the 2014 study. Participants on the low carb diet, as opposed to any other type of glycemic control, saw a huge drop in their HbA1c. Overall, there's an awful lot of studies out there that are available to find, but getting into the kind of practical side of things, how is the linking of the diet? You're getting an idea there with regards to the long-term benefits, things like your cardiometabolic health getting better, your risk of cardiovascular disease going down with those blood sugars being in check. So long-term benefits really would be things like addressing the root cause of the insulin resistance, offering much better markers for cardiovascular health, bringing down inflammation as well, because anywhere that there's high levels of insulin, your inflammatory markers go up. So if you have any condition with itis in it, it's basically an inflammatory condition. Or if you suffer from any type of inflammation throughout your body, bringing down your carbohydrates, bringing down your insulin is going to have massive, massive lifestyle improvements for you. So sustainability aspect of the diet, I know you know that Andrew comes on, I come on myself sometimes to say that it is very, very feasible on a long-term basis. It is a focus on nutrient-dense foods, whole foods, ancestral foods that basically will help the body to run in the way that it wants to run without having to constantly put out fires of the inflammation going up, the body fighting high blood sugar levels, the body fighting all of the knock-on effects of that high insulin throughout the body. So what does that actually look like on a day-to-day basis? So there is loads and loads of choice. Stage when we think of eliminating carbohydrates, right? Carbohydrates are one of the main three food groups. You have your proteins, fats, and carbohydrates. And previously, carbohydrates were thought to be an absolutely essential part of a balanced diet because it provided glucose for energy. But of course, we now know that the body does not need to run on glucose for energy. It can run on its preferred energy systems, which would be fats, good fats, whole food fats that are as close to the natural state as they can be. So you're looking at things like eggs, you're looking at things like meat, butter, Greek yogurt, good fats like avocados, nuts, seeds, all above ground vegetables are absolutely fine. If it swam, flew, or crawled upon the earth at some point, it is absolutely perfect to have on this way of eating. Participants with this and that we see on the program and people that embrace a low carbohydrate lifestyle, they notice a drop in appetite, a rise in energy because their body is now utilizing those fats for energy instead of glucose, which was actually making them sicker. So you have a very, very good kind of win-win situation there where in the interim of the body getting better and really bring down those insulin levels, which is getting the pre-diabetes and the diabetes in check, not only are participants able to find more energy, but their inflammation starts to come down. Their body is more able to process the fat burning aspect, so their metabolic health goes up, their cardiovascular disease goes down, and overall they start to feel an awful lot better. And that is all from a whole food source. So things above ground vegetables, cheeses, proteins, things that actually previously a lot of people have been told to avoid. There is no the unsaturated fat, with this something that I'll put out there right from the get-go is this particular program has won the American Heart Association International Scholar Award. There is nothing in a low carb diet that actually has interference with cardiovascular health. In fact, we see it in the inverse, that cholesterol, blood pressure, and overall risk of cardiovascular disease actually plummets as opposed to rises by including these types of foods. Now, of course, then foods to avoid would be the likes of grains and starches, sugary foods, drinks, processed foods, chickpeas, high sugar foods. But really the main ones that I would say, guys, is grains. So rice, pasta, breads, starchy vegetables like potatoes, and the likes of bananas. Avoiding these alone will really bring down your insulin levels. So day in, day out, dietary habits, it doesn't mean that you can never have these foods ever again. It just means that trying to make sure that they're just accents that you have once in a while rather than making up the bulks of your meal. The bulks of your meal should really come from proteins, good fats, above ground vegetables, berries, and things like Greek yogurts, eggs, those kind of things. So breakfasts that are more geared towards these types of foods and avoiding the likes of grains as much as possible. Really, the grains is kind of the it's the key step. By eliminating these, they're the foods that convert down into glucose the quickest in your system. So keeping an eye on your intake of grain foods is really going to have a huge impact on your daily blood sugars. So they're the foods that on a day-to-day basis causes the spikes. And when you look at your HbA1c, that number that tells whether somebody's in the diabetic range, pre-diabetic range, or the normal range, it's predicated by a 3-month snapshot of your daily readings. So really just keeping an eye on those overall will have a massive impact for your longevity with pre-diabetes and diabetes. Now, a caveat with that is if you're somebody that's currently taking strong medication like a glycoside, like insulin for your diabetes as part of your treatment, just make sure that you do keep an eye on your blood sugar levels, as the results from eliminating the likes of these lads here are very quick. So within a 3-day window of eliminating these, blood sugars tend to stabilize. And the number that you would like your blood sugars to be between is 4.5 and 7. That's an ideal range. So if you're then taking medication on top of that, just be aware. If it's things like metformin, don't worry whatsoever about it. If you're not taking medication for it, don't worry whatsoever. But if you are an individual that is on a higher dose of stronger medication, do make sure that you have access to a blood sugar monitor. And the ideal time to measure your bloods then would be about an hour and a half after your meals. You'll be able to see how your body is reacting, or how your blood sugar levels are reacting to the foods that you've just had. So that is it for today. That is a very quick introduction to reversing diabetes through foods to have, foods to avoid, foods' impact on blood sugar levels, and the role of insulin. So a very quick summary of that will basically be, guys, all carbohydrates turn to sugar in the bloodstream. Sugar elevates insulin levels. That creates that strain on the pancreas that we looked at over here. That strain on the pancreas over time causes insulin resistance, where the body is no longer able to stabilize its own blood sugar levels with its insulin, or down the line it can cause, a kind of collapse of the system altogether. So to avoid that altogether, the best and most studied approach to getting your blood sugars in check is a low carbohydrate approach that eliminates the likes of grain, starches, sugary foods, basically white and beige foods, if I was to do it very simply. Potatoes, rice, pastas, breads, bananas, porridge. They're the biggest lads to avoid. If it's a grain, you're best avoid it altogether, and to replace it with above ground vegetables, any fruit that would be in berry form. Things like Greek yogurt for breakfast with a few berries, nuts, seeds, dark chocolate. Plenty of good fats, plenty of meats, which have no negative impact on your blood sugar levels. Right, lads, that was my quick introduction to reversing type 2 diabetes and pre-diabetes through food. I hope you have found that helpful. And any comments or questions, please pop them in. Otherwise, we will be chatting to you next week. Mind yourself now. Bye.